Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second annual webinar on palliative care sponsored by the Catholic Women's League of Canada. I would like to thank Katrina from the National Office for being with us today, doing all the behind-the-scenes techie things that I cannot do. I am Margaret Schwab, National Chair of Education and Health. Please feel free to type your questions into the chat box and they will be relayed to our presenter during the presentation or after. It's suggested that you place 3 question marks before your question. That way it's easy to pick out the questions rather than just try to scroll through all the comments. Our presenter this morning is Dr. Margaret Cottle. Dr. Cottle is a palliative care physician in Greater Vancouver, British Columbia, working in home hospice programs, and is a clinical assistant professor at the University of British Columbia's Faculty of Medicine. She speaks internationally about end-of-life issues, palliative care, and dignity conserving care, and addressed members of Parliament in 2006 and 2017. She has served for many years on Euthanasia Prevention Coalition's board and continues to serve on the board of the Christian Advocacy Society of Greater Vancouver, the charity overseeing 2 local crisis pregnancy centers, a safe house for women and children, and several other related ministries. In my brief interactions with Dr. Cottle, I found she is a very compassionate woman whose passion for palliative care is inspiring. So I will turn the screen over to you, Dr. Cottle. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Margaret. You ladies have the 2 Margarets this morning, so we're happy to be here. It's just after 7 o'clock here in Vancouver, so I'm not a morning person, as my friends would tell you, and my husband. So if I'm seeming a little foggy, that's what it is. Anyway, before we get started, let's have just a moment of prayer. Father God, we lift this time to you. We thank you that you promise where 2 or 3 are gathered, that you will be there in our midst. I thank you that all the days that are for us are written in your book before one of them comes to be, and that even the darkness is light to you, and the light is as bright as the day, and in you there is no darkness at all. So we lift up our time to you right now. We pray that you would give us the mind of Christ, that you would banish confusion, and that you would help us to hear your voice in the things that are being said, and to follow you in obedience if you're calling us in the places where you're calling us. And may the words of my mouth and all of our mouths during the question time and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So I think I'm going to pass on this little slide that talks about what is dignity, because we will talk about that. But if you just be cogitating on that a little bit in your heart, so the little things that we're thinking of practical ways to accompany each other in faith, hope, and love. And this is my usual Anne of Green Gables disclaimer. Doctors always put a disclaimer slide saying that we're not in the employ of pharmaceutical companies, but this is my Anne of Green Gables disclaimer. Although I say far too much, yet if you only knew how many things I want to say and don't, you'd give me some credit for it, said Anne to Marilla. And so this is going to be more of a smorgasbord and trying to introduce you to some of these concepts. And I'm not expecting you to eat everything. So just keep your heart open and your mind open and see if there are some things here that the Lord might be calling you to put into practice in your own life or in your own parish. And there's too much text on the slides, I know that, but sometimes people are watching or participating where English isn't their first language. And I'll also make the slides available to the Catholic Women's League afterwards, so that if you want to review them, you can, and having the extra text kind of is a memory aid. So that's why it's there. So I want to give an acknowledgement to Dr. Harvey Max Choshanov. He's a distinguished professor of psychiatry and palliative care in Winnipeg. A lovely Jewish man who is my mentor, a world pioneer in dignity research and care. And this presentation is very firmly rooted in his work. And in 2012, I was formally trained in dignity therapy by him and his team. Just a wonderful man, and we have so much to be grateful for in his excellent work. So he became interested in the concept of dignity in medicine and began to study it formally when he noticed that loss of dignity kept being mentioned in the Netherlands and other places where patients were saying they wanted to have euthanasia. Now, I should probably define a few terms. That the idea of euthanasia is tends to be lethal injection. So most of what we do in Canada is euthanasia. Now, euthanasia simply means a good death. If you go back to the roots, and so there have been people who have been saying to me, well, we shouldn't call it euthanasia because it really isn't a good death. It is more of a suicide. People that are on the other side of this issue really hate the term assisted suicide because they say, well, you can be you can want this and not be suicidal, which is kind of an oxymoron. So it's hard to know. The Dutch people call it medical termination. It's a little bit brash for what we have in Canada. We've also called it physician hastened death. I'm not sure what actually that we should call it. I refuse to call it MAID unless I have to, or I'm using the term that the government is using because, as my other mentor, Dr. Balfour Mount, says, I've been doing medical aid in dying for decades, and I haven't killed anybody yet. So it's a little bit confusing, but what we have in Canada is lethal injection most of the time. Very, very seldom is the person taking pills. So let's think about dignity. So what is dignity? A simple definition would be just to be worthy of honor, respect, or esteem. And it comes from the Latin dignitas, which means worthiness. So some important questions: is dignity inherent or is it conferred? And can it be lost? So somebody says, I don't want to lose my dignity. Is it possible to lose your dignity? That's a really interesting question. So looking at the idea of this, oftentimes people will reference some of the things that they say, well, I'm losing my dignity because of X or Y or Z. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was this concept of total pain. It's a foundational principle of palliative care developed by Dr. Cicely Saunders, who is a Christian woman in the UK. And she came up with this idea of total pain, that pain has physical, psychological, social, and spiritual aspects to it. Now, this should really be a Venn diagram where things overlap, but my computer skills only went as far as a pie chart. So these things are not separate from one another. And excuse me, one of my colleagues actually said we should also have bureaucratic pain in there. And people that are in the United States know a lot about bureaucratic pain with all the insurance claims and all of that has to go on. But here in Canada, we have our own share of bureaucratic pain. If you have a biopsy and you have to wait 6 weeks to have the biopsy read, or 6 weeks before you can get a scan, or 6 weeks before or months before you can get an appointment with an oncologist or a surgeon, and then wait for your surgery, that's a form of bureaucratic pain too. So those things are important. So I'm going to give you an example of total pain here. So many of you are probably old enough to remember what a Club Z card was. It was a rewards card for Zellers. This is just an image I got. I don't know who Robert Grigg is, but I got this image off the internet because I don't have a Club Z card anymore. But when I was working in Halifax, we had a 28-year-old woman named Jen, and she had a very serious gynecological cancer with really terrible pelvic pain. And we had an awful time trying to get Jen's pain under control. This isn't her name, by the way. And these patients that I'm giving you, I have disguised the details so that I protect confidentiality. But she's a really interesting example of total pain. So it took a while before she admitted to us that part of the reason that she was having so much pain is that she believed that the pain she was having was a curse from God because of what she called her promiscuous lifestyle. And so we got her pastor in to talk to her. We spoke to her and we said, that's not the way God is. He's not cursing you with this pain. You don't deserve to have pain. So we were able to get her pain under better control after that, but there was still something that seemed to be bothering her. So I went in and talked to her a number of times. And one day she said, well, do you really want to know? And I said, yes, I really want to know. And this is what she said to me. She said, I'm just worried that after I'm gone, nobody is going to be able to cash in my Club Z points. And I looked at her and I had no idea what to say. And so I just echoed that. I said, your Club Z points? And she said, yes. She said, I've been saving my Club Z points to get a bicycle for my little boy for the last 2 years. And I'm just afraid that after I'm gone, those points are going to go to waste and he'll never get his bicycle. Well, it was really interesting because after her son had his bicycle, we took her Club Z points and we used some money from the Palliative Care Foundation, and he was riding his bicycle up and down the hallway within 2 days of this understanding. And after her son had his bicycle, her pain was well controlled with half the amount of medication that had previously not been controlling the pain. So this is a really good example about how she had spiritual pain, she had social pain, she had psychological pain, and she also had physical pain. And they were all related. And it wasn't until all of them were addressed that we were able to get her physical pain under control. So there are some dignity conserving perspectives that Dr. Choshanov and his research team have come up with, and they have some questions that go along with them. So some of the dignity conserving, and that's what we're going to be talking about now. So the continuity of self is one of those. Am I still me? So are there things about you that this disease does not affect? So these are my two of my granddaughters taking care of our dog after she had surgery. And I think one of the things that is important is if you know people who are in the hospital or who in hospice, and you can show photos and tell stories about the patients, it really makes a difference for the caregivers and for the medical staff to see a well-rounded picture of who the person really is. So am I still me? Is there anything about you that the disease does not affect? I remember one patient that we had in Halifax, and she and her husband were champion ballroom dancers. And although she was very wasted from the cancer that would take her life very quickly, she had a picture at her bedside of one of their kind of publicity shots when they were champion dancers. And it made such a difference to us to be able to see that side of her when you couldn't imagine seeing her in her physical condition ever getting up and dancing. So think about those things. You can help with that. Another thing is role preservation. What are things that you did? What things did you do before you were sick that were most important to you? And can you see the difference between these two packages that are being wrapped? Have a look at those while I tell you the story. It was another time when I was in Halifax that I was outside of a patient's doorway, and we had a little cart that patients could choose a gift if they had an important event coming up, sort of Christmas or a birthday, and they couldn't go shopping, and one of our volunteers would wrap the present for them. And I was standing outside the door just ready to go in and speak to this patient when I heard this patient explode at the volunteer. And this volunteer actually was quite a famous opera singer, and she came in on her time off and would converse with the patients. And this patient just started screaming at the opera singer and said, "Don't you know anything? Can't you even wrap a present right? Don't you know that you don't push it down from the top like this, that you bring it in from the sides or it doesn't work right?" And I was ready to go in and say to the patient, "No, please don't talk to our volunteers like that." When the volunteer herself used the principles from Proverbs 15, where a gentle answer turns away wrath, and she just said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Would you like me to do it like this? I can do that." And what I realized in that moment was that one artist understood the other artist. The woman who was yelling had been a beautiful visual artist, and she had lost her entire dominant arm to cancer and could no longer paint. And so even this simple thing of wrapping a present, which had been so important to her, she could no longer do. And the opera singer understood what it meant to this woman not to be able to do those artistic things that she'd been able to do. And she just very gently said, "I can do it like that." And I felt very chagrined and had to turn away for a moment to seek forgiveness for my hasty judgment. Another dignity conserving perspective is leaving a legacy, called generativity, or leaving a legacy. How do you want to be remembered? And you can do this with your friends. You can help them figure out ways to leave a legacy or to write down things. One of my favorite stories was also from Halifax, where a grandmother in Halifax had granddaughters who were about 8 and 10, I think, at the time. And while she was still well enough, she went down to Burke's in Halifax, and she chose personally a birthday gift for each of them right up through their 21st birthday, and had Burke's keep it in their vault. And every year on their birthday, they got a little present from their grandmother up until they turned 21. I thought that was a lovely way for her to do that. But there's all sorts of things. We had another mother who said, "I don't want anybody else telling my children the facts of life. They're only 4 and 6, and I want to be able to do that." And so she made a little video about telling the facts of life to her 2 children, and so that was something that was important to her. And we can listen and pay attention to our friends and our patients, and provide those kinds of opportunities. Another perspective is the maintenance of pride. So one of the things I'm very careful about when I teach my medical students, excuse me, is not to just go in and call somebody who's 85 years old by their first name. Just say, "How would you like to be addressed?" And being concerned for personal appearance. I don't know whether any of you have watched any of the Call the Midwife excuse me, episodes, but about the midwives in the 50s. The early ones are from the 50s and 60s in the east side of London, and one of the midwives is kind of a bumbling person and chummy, and she comes from a very upper class family, and her mother really disdains her for doing the work that she did. And she was Amanda Hart played her beautifully in the series, but she actually was a real person. But there's a stunning episode of Call the Midwife where Chummy's mother, who's this very high class woman, is dying, and Chummy never seems to be able to do anything right for her. But she ends up painting her fingernails. Excuse me, just a minute. Chummy ends up painting her mother's fingernails as one of the last things that she does for her. And it's this moment of connection that they haven't had before, where Chummy really understands her mother, and her mother sort of blesses her at the end. So what are some of the things that we can do for people to help them, even in the midst of these really dry times, to have some greenness in their life? So how can we preserve hopefulness? Another picture of one of my granddaughters. I just love this attitude. And how can we do this? Be like the little tulips that come up through the snow. And this Dr. Miller is a very interesting man. He had a serious accident as a young man and has multiple amputations, and he's a palliative care doctor. And sadly, he's now speaking for groups with Dying with Dignity conferences and promoting euthanasia in some levels. But I really like this part where he says in one of his TED Talks, if we love such moments ferociously, then maybe we can learn to live well, not in spite of death, but because of it. Let death be what takes us, not lack of imagination. So how can we, what's still possible? Can we reframe hope in ways? Can we help someone to live? Maybe they can't live until they see their children married, but are there other ways that we can do this? I remember a very touching story from the Canuck Place, the children's hospice here, where a little 6-year-old girl dressed up in the dress-up box, and she dressed up as a bride because her little brother was dying and he would never get to see her as a bride, and she wanted to show him that. So how can we maintain hopefulness? How can we reframe hope? Okay, so this slide, a colleague of mine from Europe, Dr. Gian Barasio, has given permission to use these next few slides. Sorry. So if you look at this, think to yourself, like, what's your assessment of Peter's quality of life? I've just named him Peter. That's not his real name, as far as I know. He's on a respirator. You can see he's got a tracheostomy with a respirator here. He has to use this little tablet in order to be able to speak. He's using a wheelchair. So just think in your own mind what you would probably guess is his quality of life. And then, okay, now what do you think about his quality of life? So we need to be very careful about what our assumptions are about other people's quality of life. And there's all sorts of stuff in the literature about how healthy healthcare professionals downgrade the quality of life by about 10 points versus what the patients think it is. So we need to be careful about that. So autonomy and control are another thing that are dignity conserving perspectives. So Viktor Frankl said everything, he's a Holocaust survivor, Austrian psychiatrist, and he said, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So the question is, how in control do you feel? And I think this is a good question. And there are ways that we can improve control, for the sense of control for our patients and for our loved ones. But we have to be really careful because, in my opinion, autonomy and control have been used as an excuse to lead to disengagement and even abandonment. So we can say, well, we're respecting someone's autonomy because this person really wants to be dead and we're providing what that person wants, instead of doing the really hard work of coming alongside a person and saying, you know, how can we help you? How can we reframe hope? You don't have to be alone, those types of things. So it can be a two-edged sword. Another thing is that Dr. Frankl said was, when we're no longer able to change a situation, we're challenged to change ourselves. So how at peace are you with what's happening? The book, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, is a very interesting book. It's written by this man, Jean-Dominique Baudet, who was a very high-powered editor of a French fashion magazine, and he ended up in locked-in syndrome. And he wrote the book by thinking about each sentence every night as he lay there, and then his personal assistant would come in and she would point to the letters, and he would blink when she got to the next letter of the alphabet, and he wrote the whole book that way. Now, I had said, oh, it's a great book, and I really had enjoyed the book. And then somebody got the film and said, ooh, it's kind of steamy. So I haven't ever seen the film, only the book. So the film apparently is a little bit graphic, but the book is quite amazing. And he wrote it all by just blinking his eyes over every letter. Also this resilience and fighting spirit. this is also can be a double-edged sword. So what part of you is strongest right now? And Frankl again said, life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose. So I think it's one of the things that I'm careful about is that that we don't take this too far, that we realize that as Christians, we have a duty to allow ourselves to be cared for, as well as the duty to care for others. And sometimes people can say, oh, well, you know, I'm going to be a fighter and I want everybody to think positive thoughts for me. And, you know, it doesn't matter if you were born 200 years ago, it doesn't matter how positive your thinking was for your whole life. You're just no longer with us. And sometimes if we get this idea that, oh, we don't want to have any negative vibes, that we can then, we can end up with being very alone, and the people around us can be very alone. So there's a balance between being resilient and having that fighting spirit and allowing ourselves to be helped. This is my husband helping our two granddaughters up the hill on their bicycles. The granddaughter on the left made it up the hill all by herself recently, and so she's feeling pretty proud of herself. So more of my grandchildren. So are we living in the moment? Are there things that take our mind away from our illness and offer us comfort? And can we help those around us to see what those things are? Can we remember those things ourselves? Maintaining normalcy is another thing that we can do. Are there things that we still enjoy doing on a regular basis? Reading or being read to. And this picture at the bottom is Mr. Teddy. Now, Mr. Teddy is almost 40 years old now, and that's a picture of what he looks like at the moment. And I promised our daughter Myra that nobody would laugh at Mr. Teddy. But when Myra was 2, my mother passed away, and Mr. Teddy was only about a year old at that point. And one of the last things that she did was she had a look at this bear and she said, Mr. Teddy is really dirty and he needs a bath. So she was sitting in a chair. We brought her a little bucket of sudsy water, and Myra and my mother gave Mr. Teddy a bath, and then he went out on the line and he hung out on the line until he got dry. And that was something that was really important to my mother, to be able to do that with our daughter and to be part of her normal routine. She was very good at cleaning things as well as lots of other things. But Myra said we could use the picture as long as we didn't laugh at him, because he's kind of old. Some other dignity conserving practices like seeking spiritual comfort. And this I know we're a Christian group and I've put that in there, but there are, I think we need to be careful if we're in a secular setting, that we do understand that there are others around us who may have other spiritual communities, and that we need to be open to be sharing our spiritual journey and our faith, but also respecting the space for others to have their spiritual journey as well. So privacy boundaries. What about your privacy or your body is important to you? This is a little basic watercolor that I did, gosh, more than 41 years ago now. It was my memories. I painted the memory I had of what it looked like when the sun came up the morning our son was born. And that was the dawn coming over the roofs of the houses and the bare trees in November. And I had a very long natural labor with no medications, 26 hours, and I was a mess at the end of it after our son was born. And the nurse who came in to take care of me that morning, I couldn't get up to have a shower. I was too weak. And she was so kind to me. She only uncovered the part that she was cleaning, and she made sure I had a clean nightgown. And I just lay there and wept because of how kind she was to me. And she respected these privacy boundaries and really gave me a lot of dignity in that moment where, of course, my hormones were raging. I was exhausted, all of those things. But it's so important to do that for one another. Who are the people that are most important to you, and who are our closest confidants that we can, how can we help the people around us by bringing in social support. So this is me many years ago, and this is the daughter when she was about that age. Just, it was right very soon after my mother passed away. That's the owner of Mr. Teddy, the mother of these girls here. So is there anything in the way that you're being treated that's undermining your sense of dignity? So I think that these are two of my other grandchildren. They're a little older now, but you know, I think the difference between how we treat people in long-term care as a society and what we do for pediatrics is just, it's tragic. The pediatrics, the halls in the hospitals are brightly colored. The facilities are proportionate to the size of the patients, and there's a lot of beauty there. And of course, the older people, some of the care homes are terrible. I've done palliative care in care homes, and they're not all created equal. To me, it's just obscene, the difference. It's just disgraceful that, you know, lots of the individuals who are in a pediatric unit are incontinent, and yet the place doesn't smell like urine, doesn't smell like feces. And yet, you know, the color of the paint on the walls in some of the geriatric places sucks the light out of the room, and the smell is terrible. You know, we need to do better than that. There are lots of places in the world that do better, and we need to address that. Someone once said to me, sneeringly, when I was speaking out against medical termination, "Oh, Dr. Cottle, don't be so sure you don't want to have MAID in there until you've seen the inside of a nursing home." And I just said back to the person, I think it's really obscene that a person who's given his or her life in caring for others and being a good citizen in our country would think it would be better to be dead than to be in a place that we have provided. So, do you worry about being a burden to others? And if so, to whom and in what ways? I've tried to stop using the word burden if I can, but this is part of the dignity conserving care. I talk about challenges and stresses and other things, but patients do worry about that. And they often, it's one of the reasons why they choose to have their death hastened. And so I think we need to be thinking about this. I had one patient also in Halifax who the family was so concerned. They wanted to be happy around their dad all the time. So they would do their crying down in the family room, and they'd be happy when they were in his room. And he looked at me one day and he said, "Don't they know I'm dying?" And I said, "Yes, they know that." And he says, "Aren't they going to miss me? Won't they miss me?" And so I went down to the family room and I said to this family, I said, "You know, your dad just asked me these questions. And he wonders if you're going to miss him." And so the whole family in a group just ran down the hall, crying all the way till they got to the dad's room. "Oh, Dad, we're going to miss you so much. We love you." So, you know, this idea that somehow it's a burden to share in those emotions and do that is just simply not true. That's how we do. It's actually a biblical directive to bear one another's burdens. So what are your biggest concerns for the people that you leave behind? One mother that, when I was doing my training in Montreal, she was from a culture where having a disabled child was considered to be a really bad thing. And she had an adult disabled son, and she was so worried about what was going to happen to him after she died. We couldn't get her pain under control. And so we were able to find a group home for him, and he was very happy in this group home. He came to visit his mother, and we were able to get her pain under control after that because she had her concerns about her son taken care of. Dr. Francis Peabody gave an address in 1927, which was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And I doubt that anything else that was published in JAMA in 1927 is still relevant today. But part of his address is this famous quotation where he said, "The secret of the care of the patient is in caring for the patient." And I think we can all do that. The secret of caring for your loved ones, the secret of caring for those in your parish is in caring for those people. And that's really important. So here's some little tips of things that you can do. This is my secret question that I ask. And it really is amazing the information that you get from this question. And I ask, what's the worst part of this for you? And oftentimes you're going to be expecting, oh, it's the pain or the nausea or other things like that. But I've had amazing answers to this. Things like, well, I have a brother back east who I haven't spoken to for 4 years, and I really would like to be reconciled to that person. Or I gave up a child for adoption when I was 17, and I always wondered what happened to him. Things like that sometimes we can make a difference in how things are happening for a person. And if that's the worst part of it, how amazing to be able to address what the worst part of the situation is. Parker Palmer is a Quaker man, and he has this really interesting quotation. He says, "Violence is what happens when we don't know what else to do with our suffering." I think that axiom applies on every level of life. When individuals don't know what to do with their suffering, they do violence to themselves or others near them. And I think this is very true. It's true in the medical profession, in society. We don't know what to do with suffering of women who find themselves with an unexpected pregnancy. We don't know what to do with the suffering of someone who has that total pain at the end of life. And we think that, well, maybe if we can just eliminate the sufferer, then the suffering will go away. But we don't really understand, we don't think it through about how violent that is. And so what we need to do, and what those of us who are Christians have, is we have an answer for suffering that goes beyond just the violence. And we need to think about how we do that. And your theology of suffering matters a lot. Timothy Keller wrote an excellent book called Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering, and I commend it to you. It's a little bit like a review of what different religions and what different Christian groups think about suffering. And then it's very pastoral as well. At the back part of it, he gives some pastoral things. And there's amazing personal stories that other people have written that are sprinkled throughout the text. So I listened to it as an audiobook. I own the book. I suggest it to all of our medical students. It really gives a solid view of suffering that is not simplistic. We need to just admit that there are mysteries in this beyond our understanding. We have a suffering Savior. How do we explain that? We can't. It's beyond that. So, and errors here are really destructive. If you as a Christian go into someone who is suffering and say, well, all things work together for good for those who are called, who love God and are called according to his purpose, that may be true, but that's not the place to do it. Job's friends are called Job's comforters. It's a pejorative term, but they sat with Job for a whole week before they even opened their mouths. And I don't know whether anybody in the Western world today could do that, me included, to be honest. And so just sitting there is better than facile explanations or using the wrong words. But your presence is more important than perfection. And if you watch people while you're speaking or while you're saying things, and if you see that something's landed wrong, just ask. Say, oh, I think maybe I that didn't come across correctly, what wasn't what I intended. I'm sorry, how can I make that better? And Peter Kraft is also another really good resource for you to look at if you're interested in studying or thinking a little bit more about pain and suffering. But don't stay away from people, but be really careful about doing that. Just accompanying people, being with people is really what they need. So dignity therapy is a psychological intervention that here's designed specifically to address many of the psychological, existential, and spiritual challenges that patients and their families face as they grapple with the reality of life drawing to a close. And it offers a way to preserve meaning and hope for patients approaching death. And it's kind of a bit of a long process, but the idea behind it is really excellent. And some of the questions that are asked when addressing these things are in here. Please tell me a little bit about yourself. And you can use these questions. In fact, when I gave this presentation for Canadian Physicians for Life, I had an email later from a resident in family medicine who said he used some of these questions to talk to one of his patients. And the person decided after he thought about these things that he didn't really want to have he didn't want to have euthanasia and decided to go to hospice instead. So these are some questions that Dr. Choshanov and his team have found have been really helpful in drawing out those things that are important to people. So what has been your greatest joy? When did you feel most alive? That's a really good one. What were the most important roles you've played? Are there things you want your family to know about or remember about you? What are your hopes and dreams for your loved ones? Is there anything you feel you still need to do or to say? Oh, I got the hopes and dreams for the loved ones in there twice, but I suppose that's important, that important. In creating this permanent record, are there other things that you would like to be included? So in dignity therapy, they ask these questions, they record it, they record the answers, someone types out a transcript, and then the transcript is edited to make it more like a narrative, a story. And then that's read back to the patient, and the patient makes corrections, and then, excuse me, it's printed or delivered to the patient or the family as a permanent record. And Dr. Choshanov and his team actually refused to put anything really nasty in there. If the person wants to say, I never did love you, or I have another family in Ottawa or something like that, they refuse to put that in. If the person wants to do it, fine, but they're not going to be part of launching grenades like that. So it's quite an excellent thing. And there's actually a group that did some studies on doing these dignity therapy questions for people when they're first diagnosed with dementia, and then making the book, and then the person has a record of this even when they can't remember it themselves. And they found it very helpful for the patients to be able to look over those things. Dr. Chochanov's team has also validated this dignity question. What do I need to know about you as a person to give you the best care possible? And his example was in Winnipeg. They had a woman, they asked her this question, and she said, well, I guess it would be important for you to know that I'm a survivor of the residential school system, and that any symbol of authority like white coats make me nervous. And I also find it difficult, it makes me very scared if people come into my room without knocking. And Dr. Choshanov said, gosh, do you think that made a difference in how we cared for this woman? And she hadn't volunteered those things. So if we can ask these things to our friends, or, what do we need to know about you as a person to give you the best care possible, or to care for you? And you can do that as a friend, or as a colleague, or someone who's an informal caregiver or a volunteer. So when we practice dignity conserving care, I like to think about this. Whose responsibility is it if our patients or our friends are feeling this loss of dignity? And I would like to say that it's a responsibility of all of us, that we preserve that sense of dignity around the person. And how can we do some of those things? So Dr. Chochanov's research shows that there are internal and external aspects about how we experience dignity. So it's dependent on both the strength of ourself and on the environment. And so these little snowdrops, they are strong. They come up through the snow here in January and February in Vancouver, but even they can die if it's bad enough. And so that our care team and people who are friends and family members, church friends, are part of that care team, and we provide a mirror to patients. So how the patients perceive themselves to be seen. So it's a little bit like those mirrors that you see where people are, you can see yourself several times in the mirror. So how they perceive that they're seen. So how a patient thinks we are looking at them is a powerful mediator of their dignity. So it's really important for us to do that. And it's kind of a dance, that there's this intimate connection between our care team members' affirmation and the patient's self-perception. So if we're saying to the person, we see you as dignified. When Chummy painted her mom's fingernails at the last moments of her life, I'm affirming those things that are important to you. This underscores the basis for dignity conserving care. And practicing this for our colleagues and for our team members, this is really important. So are we behaving in dignity conserving ways for the others around us, for those in our parish, for those in our small groups, for those who disagree with us? How do we treat the people who are our learners, either in our church or in a medical setting? Do we listen respectfully to all views and opinions? It's certainly hard to believe that that could ever happen when we look at what's happening in our world. Do we honor each other in our language and our attitudes? Do we have opportunities to debrief about things? Do we give back to our communities, both locally and globally? And just, do we sit down for a meal with each other? This little picture right here of all these tablecloths that are stacked, those were little tablecloths that my mother-in-law and I made, that when I was teaching about palliative care in Halifax, we had a group of people who were teachers, that I had a little tablecloth and a plate of homemade cookies for each group, because what we said to the students was, we are treating you like fellow human beings, because that's the value, that's the virtue that we want to instill in you, because that's the way we want you to treat your patients. So are we modeling this? Are we doing this? So I'm going to give you a few examples of patients and some ideas of things that can be done. So I call these people Giuseppe and Maria, but they could be any ethnicity. So let's say Giuseppe's 88 and he's got metastatic colon cancer. In his front yard, their front yard is full of fig trees and their backyard is full of tomato plants. And he's been married to Maria for 60 years. And some of the concepts that I think about when I go into a home like this is, we have to figure out more ways than to say I love you than just food. And the other thing that I find very helpful is, if someone is resistant to getting some help or having help, then what I do is I say, let's get help for the other person. So let's say Maria says, I can take care of Giuseppe. I've been married to him for 60 years. Then I'll say to Maria, yeah, Maria, you're doing a great job and we know you can, but Giuseppe would feel so much better if we got somebody in to help you. It would put his mind at ease. Or if Giuseppe's the one that's saying, I don't need any help, oh, Giuseppe, we know you're strong, but it would be so helpful for Maria if we could just have somebody in here to help her a couple days a week. So it's getting help for the other person can be a really helpful way of helping the person who's resistant to save face and to accept help. This isn't Rachel. Some friends of mine who are both physicians and said they would allow their family to be to be used as a model. But we had here in Vancouver, we had a 36-year-old mother of 4. She had metastatic breast cancer, and her church community was just amazing. After she passed away, 4 different families in that church, where each of those families had a child the same age as one of Rachel's children. And what they did was they said, we're going to just adopt those. Each family adopted one of those children, sort of adopted. They said they let that father have a year to get back on his feet. And they said, when we sign up our son for soccer, we're going to sign up your son. when there's a birthday party for our daughter, there's going to be a birthday party for your daughter too. And, you know, all of those things that they just gave him space to grieve his wife and to get back on his feet. And one of the things that I find is that sometimes families are resistant to getting that kind of help. And so what I'll say is, if the situation were reversed, what would you be doing? Oh, well, I'd be in there and doing that. So then I say, well, can you give your friend or your friends credit for being as good a friend as you are? And sometimes that's really helpful. And then just even having somebody, if you're in your parish, to say, okay, you know Rachel's family, you go to the family and you say, give me a list of things that would be helpful to you. And I will find people who will do those things, like driving to soccer practice or coming and vacuuming once a week or doing the laundry, whatever it is. And there are some websites that can help with that, like Caring Bridge and Meal Train. But I think those kinds of things can be very helpful. And the one thing I would say for the help coordinator, it's really important to make the things specific, like can you bring a meal on Tuesdays and time limited for the month of June, for example. And so then people don't feel like they're signing up for something for the rest of their life. Specific, time limited, but get somebody else to deal with it. Beware of magical thinking about being present at the time of death. You can be very helpful to people who feel like, oh gosh, I wasn't there when mom died. And just by saying something like, focus on the last 30 years, not the last 30 seconds. It's kind of mysterious, because sometimes people will wait until everybody's gone before they do pass away. I don't know why. Or sometimes they'll wait until somebody comes. We just don't know about that. And just don't feel like the last 30 years are wasted if you're not there for the last 30 seconds. Some things for bereavement. Telling people they did a great job if it was true, acknowledging that you never get over losing a loved one. It's really difficult. The literature shows that the worst time tends to be about 4 to 6 weeks after someone passes away. All of the stuff is done with the funeral and all of those other things, and people have stopped sending cards. So if you know of someone who is bereaved and you can help them plan something to look forward to 4 to 6 weeks out, that can be a really helpful thing. And then just thinking about the arts as a portal for healing and grief, expressing the inexpressible, just painting, poetry, writing, getting out in nature, encouraging lament, allowing people to be upset about things is really important. So Dr. Sheila Cassidy is a Catholic physician. She's a very interesting lady. Some of you may know of her. She wrote a book called Audacity to Believe. I think she was in Chile as a doctor there, and she treated a revolutionary and ended up in solitary confinement. And she went back to Britain after that, and she thought maybe she would become a nun. And after she'd been in with the sisters for a while, they mutually decided that that wasn't for her. And she went to Plymouth, England, and was the head of she was the doctor at the hospice there for many years. And she wrote this amazing book called Sharing the Darkness, about the spirituality of caring. And she has some amazing images in there, and I'd like to share some of her insights. So she talks about the alabaster jar that Mary, Martha's sister, had, and how she poured the contents of this alabaster jar, this precious spikenard, over Jesus' feet, and how this, just what this symbolized at that time. And she talked about how our attitude of that when we're caring for somebody who doesn't have much time left, that's an extravagance of caring, that other people can see as wasted on somebody who's not going to get better. So she said, our attitude of extravagant caring can be prophetic for our culture, just as the aroma of Mary's precious spikenard was when she spent her dowry to anoint Jesus' feet. The most important message is the unspoken one to the world at large. If I, as a doctor, spend an hour of my clinic time talking to a woman who has only a few weeks to live, I am making a clear statement of her worth. It is a prophetic statement about the unique value of the human person, an affirmation that people matter just because they are people, because God made them and loves them just the way they are. So this, when we care extravagantly for people, that aroma goes up as a witness to our world, just as the aroma of Mary's precious spikenard did. Also the Stabat Mater, which, as most of you probably know, it means the mother stands. And it's talking about Mary at the foot of the cross. These are pictures that I took of that are not very good, but of a beautiful chapel in Issaquah, Washington. It was actually stained glass, that is structural stained glass, so the colors are so vibrant. And this picture right here is Mary standing at the foot of the cross, and she was bearing witness, and nobody would say that her bearing witness was nothing. And I think that's something to really remember, that when we bear witness with people, we can actually sing, we can pray with them, we can talk to them. And Mary could do none of that, but no one would ever say that her standing there was nothing. And we need to remember that and remind each other of that. And this is what Sheila Cassidy says: slowly, as the years go by, I learn about the importance of powerlessness. I experience it in my own life, and I live with it in my work. The secret is not to be afraid of it, not to run away. The dying know we are not God. All they ask is that we do not desert them, that we stand our ground at the foot of the cross. At this stage of the journey of being there, of simply being, it is, in many ways, the hardest part. So standing your ground at the foot of the cross, not running away, that can be hard, but it's also very powerful. So I'm looking at Dr. Chochanov's original motivation for studying dignity conserving care. So I decided a while ago that I wanted to cut through the euphemisms that people, the obscure language that people have about and ask this question: what do you have to believe to support MAID, euthanasia, assisted suicide, medical termination? So what do you have to believe in order to think that this is a good idea? So here are the three principles that are stated starkly, but you can't get around these things, no matter what my MP says. So first of all, you have to believe that it can be a societal good to have a legal framework to kill a member of the human family outside of self-defense. So you have to take away that prohibition, that it can be a good to be legal for one member of the human family to kill another. And you have to believe that some lives are not worth living, and not that person, but others decide which lives those are, because there are qualifications. The government decides who qualifies for MAID. And it's, this may become a moot point. There's definitely people in the Netherlands who are feeling like you should be able to just to go into any pharmacy and get death pills if you are done with living. And they're also talking about bringing in legislation for people, if they feel like they've had a completed life, that they can, without having any other issues, that they can go. And then also you can believe that at least in some places, killing can be preferable to caring in some situations. So I know those are very stark, and I wouldn't necessarily just say those to everybody, but if you strip away what they're talking about with autonomy and mercy and all this kind of stuff, you actually have to believe these things before you can support medical termination. So what's more honored in Canada, rights or love? And one of my colleagues once said, rights are an admission that love has failed. And I think we as Christians really need to think about that. If we did what Paul said in Philippians 2, that each of us should look out for the concerns of other people more than our own, for the rights of other people. If we all did that, we wouldn't need to have rights. If we loved enough, we would be looking out for the interests of others, and I wouldn't have to look out for my own interests because you would be looking out for them. But, Winston Churchill once said, democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. And so we have to have rights because we don't love like that. We don't love like Jesus. But I think as Christians, we need to be thinking about, are we honoring rights over love, and not realizing that having rights is an admission that love has failed. And what kind of story do we want to live in and leave for our children and our grandchildren? Do we want to leave a story of rights over love, or love over rights? So, and now I will show you the most excellent way. Who knows where that's from? Since it's a rhetorical question, I'm going to show you. It's part of the last verses of 1 Corinthians 12. And it goes, the most excellent way is the way of love. And Paul says, love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part, then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, and the greatest of these is love. This is more important than rights. The greatest of these is love. So, can we practice dignity conserving care for our patients and their loved ones, for our colleagues, for the profession of medicine, for our communities? Each of you has a part to play. And by practicing these things, it provides both the challenge and the opportunity to be true healers. And you don't have to be a doctor to be a healer. One of the best healers on our team in Halifax was our cleaning lady, Loretta, who people would talk to and would tell her their troubles, and she would come and tell us when she knew people needed extra pain medication because they would talk to her about it. So, and we need to stay more integrated with ourselves, not despite our contact with other members of our human family who are suffering, but indeed because of that privilege and gift that we have to be able to accompany them when they're in their darkest moments. And, you know, when you look at our world today, it can look overwhelming. There is so much pain, so much hurt, so much upheaval. But I love that story of the little boy who was walking along the ocean side when there had been a really high tide and there was starfish all over the place. And he was throwing them one at a time back down into the area where they could actually be covered with the water again. And someone came along and said, oh, yes, what are you doing? You're not going to make any difference at all. It's not going to matter. Look at all these starfish. And he just kept throwing the starfish. And he said, it'll matter to this one. It'll matter to this one. So I challenge you today to look around in your own parish, in your own family, in your own life, and find those starfish that it'll matter to when you use these principles of practicing dignity conserving care and preserving the dignity, bringing that beautiful, loving, affirming dignity around the lives of the people whom you know. This is my email, and if you would like to contact me personally, I am happy to speak with you or to email with you. I'd like to just take a moment right now before we go to the question and answer time to pray for each of you. Father God, I thank you for the way that you challenge us to be more like the Lord Jesus and to follow in your footsteps. You who never passed by anyone who was suffering without raising them, without loving them, and who went into the darkest places, died on the cross for us. I pray that you would inspire us and by your Spirit empower us to do the things that you have called us to do to bring your light into a dark world. I thank you for the kind attention of these women this morning, and I pray that that they would be empowered to do the things that you're calling them to do. And we ask it in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay. So let me see, I think I can stop showing my screen, and maybe you can see me a little better then. So see if there are any questions. Maybe we'll get Margaret back and she can help me figure this out.
So we do have some questions.
Okay.
One of the questions that we have from Claudette Peters is, does Dr. Choshanov have a book on dignity conserving care?
He does have some things that one there's a, it's called what was the name of it? It's in the presentation. It talks about something for final days, final thoughts for final days, or something like that. If you Google his name, you'll find that. He also had a very simple article called the ABCD of Dignity Conserving Care. It's only a few pages long in the British Medical Journal. So that's another place where you can look at it. His book about, I think it's called Final Thoughts for Final Days. But if you look at that book, it's the principles of dignity conserving care are in there, and he talks about the dignity therapy and how they developed it a little bit. It's just a little thing, tiny book, but there's a lot of stuff out on the web from his things. And if you go to Cancer Care Manitoba, there's a dignity inventory. There's lots of things that are on the website there that can help you figure out what kind of questions to ask and that sort of thing. So.
Thank you. We have another question about, how do we lend support to individuals who choose MAID while respecting their autonomy and values?
Oh, brother. I deal with this in my work all the time. So I think this is a two-pronged thing. And I think we need to give each other some grace that there maybe isn't just one way to do this. First of all, I think we need to get upstream of this a little bit so that in our parishes, that our priests and our pastors realize that the parishioners want to hear what they think about these things. So I think sometimes pastors and priests are a little bit afraid to say, this is wrong. It's a sin to commit suicide. We in this way anyway. When people are desperate and commit suicide because they're sick, as one of my friends said, when her son committed suicide, I realized that he had a terminal illness and it took his life. So that part I understand. But the idea that somehow, like the church on the prairies did recently, where they had the woman into the sanctuary and blessed her, and then they had the doctor perform the termination right in their sanctuary, I thought I was going to be sick. But that we need to have this understanding, this theology that's so clear that our life is a gift from God, and that the part of the 10 Commandments that says do not kill is really important, and that it doesn't just affect me. It's not just autonomy. And I think one of the ways that I've done this is to say, and this is aside from the one person that's in front of you. Okay, so when it's your parish or people who are saying, well, we should just respect people's autonomy and do this. One of the things that I've done when I've given these talks publicly is in person, is I'll have somebody from the audience stand up and I'll say, okay, you get to be the patient and you're representing the patient. And then I'll have another person stand up and you're representing all the nurses and you're representing the doctors and you're representing the funeral director and the ward clerk and the care aides and the family and the friends and the teachers and the first responders and the law enforcement officers. And you get a whole group of people, the clergy, you get a whole group of people up there and you say, okay, so here's the patient, but it's not just about the patient. It's not somebody who hoards pills and takes too many pills, or has an overdose of opiates, or who goes out behind the barn and shoots himself. We're sad about those things, and we may say, oh gosh, I should have been more careful with the pills, or I should have taken away the gun, or whatever. But we're not complicit in the same way as the pharmacist who has to dispense the medication, or the team at the funeral home who has to take care of the body, or the doctors and the nurses. That is not autonomy. That is asking the whole society to be involved in the death of this person. That it's not simply autonomy. And how I die affects my whole culture. And asking people to kill me affects my whole culture. We have a tragedy here in Vancouver, and I'm sure all cities across the country do, where there are people in our poorest postal code, the downtown east side, and they die without ever we don't even know their name, and yet their death affects us. This idea that no person is an island, we understand that at a certain level. And we need in our parishes to say, look, if you're feeling so desperate that you want to end your life, we need to come alongside you. We need to help you reframe hope. We need to make sure you get good palliative care so that you're not feeling a lot of pain, you're not having a lot of symptoms, but you have something valuable to give us. Even if all you have to give us is your permission to care for you, that is something that is valuable to us. Okay, so that's the broader thing on the parish. We need to get upstream of this and say, this is never okay for a serious Christian to seek this. Now, it's not that the person would ask for it. I can see that there might be a time in my life when I would wish I were dead, but I would hope that there are people around me who would realize that my worst day shouldn't be my last day, and that would say to me, you know, Margaret, we realize that you feel really awful and you maybe wish you were dead, but we're going to come alongside you. We're going to read to you. We're going to hold you. We're going to sing to you. We're going to bring your grandchildren and your dog to see you. We're going to affirm that your life is worth living and you are important to us. Now, that's a different issue than if somebody's already decided to do it. And what do you do about that situation? Do you show up when it's going to happen? And I think each of you is going to have to make your own decision about that. Whether you feel you can be on that journey with the person, whether you feel that you can affirm that. You know, I've had pastors say to me, people have asked me to do the funeral. You know, what do I do about that? And I think a lot of it depends on how involved they're asking you to be. Are they asking you to bless this decision? I don't think I could ever bless a decision like that. It's a tricky one. And I think all the more reason that we need to get upstream of it so that fewer people are asking for it, because they understand what the implications are, that they are, the Hippocratic Oath is 2,400 years old. It was before Jesus. And that protection of saying we're never going to kill anybody, that the healers are not going to be killers, is like an old growth forest. And we need to protect our metaphysical environment just as much as we protect our physical environment. And the metaphysical environment says that we don't kill each other. We care for each other as members of the human family. One of my colleagues says that we provide hospitality for those who are most vulnerable among us, whether it's the beginning of life or the end of life. I think sometimes using the term sanctity of life, people just close down and they don't hear anything else you say. But I talk about respect for every member of the human family, or as Dr. Genesis, providing hospitality for the most vulnerable among us. But it's a difficult question about, you know, how do you deal with somebody who's already made up their mind to do it? And I guess the thing I would say would be, I would ask some of those questions when you go to visit, some of those dignity questions, you know, or what's the worst part about this? Why are you wanting to do this? Up until recently, it's been part of the standard of care, of palliative care, that if somebody says, I wish I were dead, we don't say, oh, well, we'll call the team to make it happen. We say, why? you know, why are you feeling that way? How can we reframe hope? How can we come alongside you so that you really, as Dr. Saunders said, will help you, not only to help you die peacefully, but to live until you die. So, you know, I think those are some of the things that we need to be doing. And I don't know, maybe if you ask some of those questions, or maybe if you don't give your blessing, it will be the kind of thing that will help the person to reconsider. But it's a hard one. I don't have a hard and fast answer to that, but I think we do need to give each other a little bit of grace as to where we decide to go. But each of you should go to your parish priest and say, we need to have some really strong teaching about this, because I don't want to be in that position where somebody from our parish says, oh, will you come to my last party while somebody comes and gives me a lethal injection. Long answer, but I don't have a really good answer for that, other than that.
Thank you. We have another question regarding, do you see the role of the compassionate community movement, PALI in Canada, to be an opportunity for the larger secular community to come to advance end-of-life care for all?
I think Alex Schadenberg's group of the compassionate communities is excellent. We really do need to have more of a push for palliative care. One of the really tragic and terrible things that happened with this legislation around medical termination is that MAID is now considered a right under the Canada Health Act, and palliative care is not. The stats that we have show that at best 30% of Canadians have access to any form of palliative care, and only 15% of Canadians have access to high quality tertiary palliative care. So we've gone to this idea that, well, you know, we should be terminating people before we even have access to it. So, you know, I don't know what to say. I went and saw my own MP about these issues, and I said I didn't want to see the expansion of medical termination, of MAID. And she said, well, I was the only one who had come to her to say I didn't want it expanded. So many people had said, oh, if I get to the place where I can't recognize my family, I want to be able to do it by advance directive. I want to be able to have it for psychiatric reasons. They were all pushing her to do it. And I said, this is wrong. We have a double standard for people who are seeking suicide because they're, you know, the 20-year-old because his girlfriend has left him, versus a disabled person, or someone who has an acquired disability because of illness or other things like that. And without even realizing it, she actually just brought the idea of money into it. She thought she was being kind to me when she said, oh, Dr. Cottle, you know, I wish that everybody could have a caring physician like you. But, you know, doctors are retiring and we just don't have the resources to do that. So we need to have something for people that can't have somebody who's as good as you are. And what she was really saying was, we're not willing to spend the money in Canada so that everybody can have quality palliative care. We'll give $8 million to somebody who pushes the puck around the ice, but we're not going to spend the money to do that. You just have to look at the case of Roger Foley in Ontario, who was so badly treated at home that he refused to leave the hospital. And the people came to him. He has recordings of 2 different healthcare professionals who came to him and said, you know, we can't give you the kind of care you're asking for at home, but did you ever consider MAID? So we need to be speaking up about these things. And yes, we do need to push for better palliative care, but there are a steady number of palliative care doctors, and even the virtual hospice that was such a good resource for so many years and still is a good resource, but they've put stuff up there about MAID now. Even though the very definition of the World Health Organization definition and the foundations of palliative care say it does not hasten or prolong natural death. So I don't know, it's easy to be discouraged, but I have come to the place where I realize that this is a long game, just as it is for beginning of life issues, and that what I want to be sure is that there is a record that no one can say nobody said anything. That we have put it forward, that there is a more excellent way, that love is better than rights, and caring is better than killing. And that's all we can do. We can only take care of the starfish in front of us. And as Alexander Solzhenitsyn told the people of the Soviet Union when he left, he says, at least live not by lies. So if you know what the truth is, speak the truth. And even if you're silent when somebody is, and refuse to say the things that others are wanting you to say, like, oh, it's all about autonomy, or this is merciful, or this is good. Even refusing to go along with what the present narrative is standing your ground at the foot of the cross. And we need to do that. We need to, if you want to have Christian physicians to care for you and your children and your grandchildren, you need to speak up about conscience protection. You need to talk to your MPs and your MPPs about conscience protection, because already in Nova Scotia and in Ontario, physicians are required, if they have conscientious objections to specific things like abortion and euthanasia, they're required to make what's called an effective referral for those procedures, which means that they will send the patient to someone whom they know will provide the service. So, and you can lose your license for not doing that. There are Christian physicians across the country who are being hauled into the department chairman, being told they're being watched because they're obstructing people from not being able to get MAID that's their right to have. So you need to speak up and protect us if you want to have Christian physicians a generation from now, because there are published papers out there that are calling for students not to be admitted to the study of medicine, not even to be allowed to study medicine, unless they sign on at the beginning that they are willing to perform any procedure that is legal. So if you want to be an eye doctor, if you're not willing to give lethal injections or perform abortions, you shouldn't be allowed to go to medical school. So, it's a lot. There's a lot of darkness out there, but we're promised as one of my colleagues once said, I've read the book and we win. So it's true that at the end of this, Jesus is victor, and we need to just be faithful and stand firm where we are. But you can make a difference. There's a group called Canadians for Conscience that you can be part of. You can speak up in your parish. You can get talks like this to be held in your local parish. Lots of things you can do, and I hope you will do them.
Thank you, Dr. Cottle. We have another question, kind of a question. It says, am I wrong in feeling that many of the principles mentioned can be applied to caring for those suffering from dementia?
Yes, yeah. Dementia actually is a terminal illness. It does affect the brain if it goes on long enough, to the place where people are not able to swallow and not able to eat, and it affects the functioning of the brain. Yes, these things definitely can do that. I was telling you about my mother my mother dying when she was 61 and doing that of cancer, and washing Mr. Teddy. And my father died when he was 92, and he had dementia. So I've seen both sides of that. And excuse me just a minute. It's allergy season here. And I think one of the ways that we can definitely do that is to resist this idea where people say, oh, well, you're dead anyway. You know, people would say to me sometimes, oh, your dad died years, you know, a couple years before he really died. He was already dead, you know, because he knew who we were, and we didn't have that kind of an issue. But, you know, he was already really, he wasn't really living anymore. And I said, no, you know, my father was my father, and not all of him was accessible to me at the end of his life, but he was still my father, and I had the privilege of caring for him. And during his last illness, he had a bad septic urinary tract infection, and he had to go to the emergency room in the middle of the night. And while we were there, they brought in a warm blanket for him. And before he would use that warm blanket, he looked over at me and he said, "Is there one for you too?" And I was just, it took my breath away. This man who could not remember at 92 whether his parents were still alive or not was still concerned about me and whether there was a warm blanket for me. And I was sharing this with a friend of mine who had also cared for his father when he had dementia. And he said to me, yes, dementia takes a lot away from us. He said, but the person is still there. And every once in a while, you get a little flash and you see the person that your mother fell in love with and your grandmother was so proud of. And I thought that was just lovely how my friend sort of humanized that experience that I got to see in that moment, a reminder of the person my mother fell in love with and my grandmother was so proud of. And I think that that's what we need to do. We need to be doing that. And actually, some of those things that Dr. Choshanov talked about, one of the things that you could do is to ask some of those questions. Put together a document, ask those questions while the person is still in the early phases of dementia. Write it down and then have the book that the person can look over if they get to the place where things are really tough. And it will be a beautiful legacy anyway, whatever happens. So yes, those principles do apply in dementia.
Thank you so much, Dr. Caudill. If there are any other questions, we recommend putting them in the question box now.
You folks have all been very, very patient with me. I told you my Anne of Green Gables disclaimer. I have a lot to say about these issues.
We have a lot of comments saying thank you so much, that it was very informative and that they very much appreciated your speaking today.
I'm glad to be here, glad to be invited. It's always nice to be among the 7,000 that haven't bowed the knee to Baal.
I think if there are no more questions, Katrina, that we will just say a big thank you to Dr. Caudill. This has been wonderful. You've given us a lot to think about, I'll tell you. You know, today's a special day for me, so I was thinking of the things we did or that I have done and the things that I have failed to do in treating people who are ill. And it certainly gave me a lot to think about, and I hope that everybody else feels the same way. We will continue to fight for palliative care because it is so important. And God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll send a PDF copy of the slides to Katrina, and she can figure out about how to send those out to participants if they'd like to have a copy of those things. And they have the references to the books and the things on there too, so that you'll be able to find those things. And
Yes.
thank you, Margaret, for being vulnerable with us today as well. And we'll be thinking of you on this anniversary of your daughter's death, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and the recording will be made available on the CWL website by Wednesday for anyone that wishes to look back on it for reference.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not afraid to be out there. So, tell your friends. Tell your friends and get them to think about some of these issues, and get to your parish and say, I don't want to have that call from somebody who's a friend of mine that says, I'm having maid tomorrow, will you come to my party? I want us to have better ways of doing things, the most excellent way, the way of love. All right, well, God bless you all, and thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Cottle. And goodbye, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Bye-bye.